welcome to the stage from UCL, Kerstin.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about data and data-driven design today. So, is this working? It is, very good. So let's talk about what offices are at the moment and what they should be to start with. Now, it's very easy to think about the perfect office because it's straightforward. What workers need is spaces to do their work, is to concentrate, to collaborate, to find spaces to socialize, to talk to others, have a cup of tea, have good food, and actually get their work done. That suits the business, that enhances business performance. However, workspaces today, unfortunately, don't always do that. 74% of workers are actually dissatisfied, and we've heard stats before about people being actively disengaged. Gallup studies 24% being actually really unhappy about where they are and what they do. Some even suggest, and that was a piece in The Guardian, I think exactly to the date last year, saying that open plan offices were devised by Satan in the deepest caverns of hell. Now this is pretty strong, but actually if I can put your attention to the sharing stats, 18,000 people shared this on Facebook, and it's actually based on original research. If we think about most of our workplaces are open plan, are we just all getting it incredibly wrong? Or what is going on here? Now, how are designers reacting to this? Well, to some degree, how they've always reacted to this. I'm an architect by background, so I kind of feel apologized for saying that a lot of my colleagues would just focus on the aesthetics, on the beauty, follow the latest fads, put in an office slide, everyone will be happy, right? Maybe not. So what I'm suggesting here is a different approach, and that's the approach that we call data-driven design, sometimes also called evidence-based design. And we've had a couple of discussions in the morning in the sessions where a lot of people said, we need more research, we need to know what we're doing, we need to define the metrics. So this is exactly what I'm doing in my research, trying to define some of the metrics and trying to find ways to actually use data. Now, what good is data? Well, first of all, it allows, that was too far. Oh dear. Can I go back?
Yes, with the left arrow.
Ah, and one more back. There we are. Cool. Now, what data allows us is to actually take decisions based on facts. Facts and figures that no one can argue with. And I quite like Jim Barksdale saying, if we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's just go with mine. And I think in the workplace, we hear opinions so often. It's all very opinionated. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone knows what they're talking about. And then there's a huge kind of struggle to kind of think about how should we do the workplace design. And then the consultants come in and it's always the same. So using data can actually help you on that. Now, what type of data do we use? Well, first of all, we look at spatial layout, and I think this is quite unique. And this is a method and a theory pioneered at UCL called space syntax. In a nutshell, what we do with space syntax is we take a floor plan, just a pure geometry of the floor plan, and we would colour it in a scheme from red to blue, warm colours to cooler colours, to show the degree of integration or segregation in the floor plan. The red areas are those with, on average, the shortest paths, where a lot of the paths through the office would actually intersect. Those are the areas in the office that you would have most buzz, most livelihood, the highest number of people interacting and meeting. And we can do this with any floor plan. We have simulation software where we can chuck in any floor plan, and with that we can predict the amount of sociability, the amount of interactions happening in an office, and where they would actually happen, because they will happen in those red areas and not the blue areas. So that is one kind of set of metrics that we can actually measure to understand the potential of a floor plan. Now, the other bit of data is space usage data. So we would actually go into a workplace in an office, most of the times with participant observers. I've also used RFID technology to track people. We ask questions like, where do people meet, who do they talk to, where do they interact, how interactive is the place? And then we all bring this together with organisational cultures, and this is quite important because not every workplace is the same. And not every organisation is the same. So what works for one organisation might not work for the other. And it's actually quite important to find a solution that flies with the business, that kind of suits for them. So organisational cultures are actually quite important. Why bother with all that spatial data? We are humans, we have bodies. We live in space, we breathe in space. Everything we do in space. Who we meet, what we think, how we feel, it's all driven by space. So our spatialized lives is a fact, and we have to look at how we design spaces because it will impact what humans do in spaces. Now let's look at some of the principles of data-driven design. How does it work? Well, first of all, what we do is that we would analyze and learn from single cases to start with. So we would do one study after the other and kind of get a picture of what is happening in those cases. The next step then is to establish patterns and relationships. So to find how really what we find in one case, how does that work in another case, and how does that work in another case? So essentially what we're doing is building up big data sets to learn from. Now the next step then, and that is quite crucial, is to also understand the Black Swans. So some of you may be familiar with Black Swan theory. Just because all you've seen in your life is white swans, you see a workplace, people interact in the kitchen, you see another workplace, of course people interact in the kitchen, you see another workplace, of course people interact in the kitchen, but there may be one where people don't interact in the kitchen. As a researcher, I'm quite excited about those cases because they are the odd ones out, and they help us to refine our theories and to actually get better idea on research and what we need to do. Ultimately, what we like to do is being able to predict human usage of space by looking at floor plans and spatial design, because that is what we can influence as designers. Now let me show you a case study that was done by my colleagues at Space Lab. So I'm also head or director of research and innovation at Space Lab, a practice in Shoreditch, where they practice some of those data-driven design principles and work with that in their consultancy. So this is a case study by Space Lab. And they've worked, among others, with a media company. A very typical scenario, I bet all of you have seen this. Media company, growing, 850 staff, outgrown their office space, high-cost property in Soho. They've moved part of the organisation into a second building, collaboration really suffered, costs gone up. So they were really wondering, can we consolidate? Can we find a different solution? And their lease was running out, so here was an opportunity to kind of rethink. So rather than now going in and saying, oh, of course, you could do a little bit of flexible working, have a ratio of 8 desks for 10 people, squeeze your office space, and find a new property, job done. What we did here was really to look at what does the data suggest. So how can we find what really is suitable for that company? Now, first of all, we looked at the spatial floor plan. Now, this is a space syntax analysis of the floor plan. What you can see here is that there's a lot of green, right? So I said before, there's a range from red, very integrated, to blue, very segregated. What you find by the nature of this floor plan is that it's all kind of averagely integrated, which is not a great place to be, because the blue spaces are great for concentration, the red spaces are great for creating a buzz. If you have none of those, you don't really have much leeway to work with the space. So what was happening here is a lot of segregated silos, people really not being able to bump into each other, to meet other people, and that was just by the nature of the floor plate. So one of the things that immediately cropped up was to say, well guys, this is not the ideal building. Just don't bother about renewing your lease, you need to move out of there. So that was step number one. Then we also looked at occupancy data, how people actually use the space. What was quite apparent is that their studios were occupied only 18% of the time. It was quite interesting. Studios only made up 3% of the floor plan, so quite a small kind of area. But talking to the CEOs, they said, well, actually, we're moving into digital markets, and we're quite a digital company. Well, are you really? We asked people, staff survey, how often do you use those studios? 57% of staff, and we had a return quote in the 80%, 57% of staff said we use the studios never. So apparently it's not a very digital business. Apparently people are doing quite a lot in a kind of old ideas, old marketplace of doing print media. So when we reflected this back to the company, they said, oh wow, we have to do something. We actually have to make sure that we can become more digital. And part of the problem here was that the studios were in some of the rather segregated spaces, so where people don't actually naturally move along. So that then became part of the solution. So the strategy, the data-driven design strategy, was to create a social hub right next to the studios and put it into the most integrated part of the building as the main driver forward, to really for the business to become digital-based, to become a new place, a new organisational culture, where the studio and the social hub is integrated, is part of what they do. Now this is the new layout, so they found a new property near Piccadilly, reduced their floor plate to those 4 floors, actually reduced their footprint by 33%. And the studios were now, I don't know, in the back rows you probably can't see that, down here that kind of red square is where the studios are. So they're really in an integrated space. If you just zoom into the floor plan layout, you can see the studios in those kind of spaces here. And right next to it is a whole series of different spaces, social spaces, a hub, a canteen, people to have a cup of coffee. So all of the ways, the paths of people through the office actually integrate the studio. So the studio really becomes part of the business. So that was the case study. I really just want to quickly wrap up by coming back to the point of data again. Now, data is not everything, okay? I love data, I'm a researcher, but data is only a small bit of this. I think what is still needed is the communication between the consultants, the designers, and the clients to actually move forward and find a solution that is new and that ticks with the business. And I want to end with one of my favourite quotes by Scott Birkin, fantastic book, A Year Without Pants, where he said, data can't decide things for you. It can help you see things more clearly, if captured carefully, but that's not the same as deciding. And those kinds of decisions we still have to make, but let's make them based on data, based on facts and figures, and that was what we're trying to establish as the new science of workplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One question maybe?
Oh, please.
Does anybody have a question on data? Does anybody love data as much as Kerstin does? Any questions? What is it?
Hi there, this is a question from Twitter, not from me, a guy called Simon Heath. How do facts fit the human dimension? Choice, flexibility, personalisation, emotions and feelings, etc.
Thank you, very good question. Thanks for the question, Simon. I think it's at the heart of what we do with data is to give people a voice and to listen to people. So data always sounds so harsh, so unemotional and so kind of, but part of what we're doing is actually to engage with people and to ask people for their opinions. So in each of the cases, we would do a staff survey and actually ask every single member of staff for their opinion and their viewpoint. And that is very much about the people and their views on space.
Beautiful. Thank you very much indeed, Kerstin. Thank you.